A master's degree in fine arts. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is work and a bit of the writing that I've done towards my graduate thesis. I just wanted to thank the excellent organizers and volunteers for running this weekend. It's been incredible, and my family for coming to see me talk. And I think I've realized since I've been here that discovering my relationship to animality and non-human animals is really a journey. And so this work is representative of the journey that I'm on and the stage that I'm at, and not necessarily an endpoint in my feelings on ethics and how I exist in the world. So a couple of caveats there. And I was going to give you a warning that some people find my work difficult to look at and that this discomfort is very intentional. However, if you saw Suko's work yesterday, that kind of seems like a moot point, because if you can handle what she does, you can handle this. So, so I just wanted you to keep in mind the intentions behind that discomfort, and that everything you're seeing is constructed. So no one's body was being used to produce these work. They're all made by me, by my hands. So, okay, let's get started. 2 years ago, I began working towards my thesis, and in doing that, I created photographs illustrating dreams that were recounted to me, all of which centered around an animal. As I worked, I realized I had little interest in the psychoanalytic interpretations of the animal as metaphor. I did, however, begin to see a connection between an animal conjured in a dream and a fetus inhabiting a mother's body. Both are part of us and yet other from us. This strange correlation between the dreamt animal and the fetus has informed the work which has become my thesis. My photographs give the initial impression of scientific specimens, appealing to distanced, rational contemplation. And yet, this cursory reading is subverted by the singularity of the creatures depicted, because they resist our knowing. Their quasi-Latin names do not satisfy, do not encompass the figures that they refer to. Now, this reading of the images as scientific is entrenched in the history and my use of the medium of photography. The viewer's gaze, directed by the camera's lens, falls on these figures in the antiseptic void of a laboratory field, or what could be the black of an X-ray or a telescopic view of a galaxy. In these images, the animal is objectified, presented as a sample of genus and species. And yet I have made these creatures strangely vulnerable, distinct individuals in order to disrupt their massification. My sculptures, on the other hand, are meant to appeal viscerally through affect. Ideally, we have an embodied reaction to them and respond empathetically. This demonstrates to us not only that art engages in a disembodied free play of imagination, or in other words, is something that takes place only in the mind, but also, as Carrie Real points out in her book, Thinking Animals, that such a play takes place in and through a body's involuntary perceptions. So here are 3 of my deerhound sculptures. The first is nestled between 2 legs, my legs. He is missing a limb and has a prosthetic ear. The second is trying to pick up a fully grown antler, and it's kind of hard to see from this documentation, but he's so underdeveloped that his back end is counterlevered off the ground. And finally, the third is offering so much of himself that his guts are spilling out and lifting him off his feet. He is truly turning himself out for you. Now, I have placed these figures in these predicaments to allude to the absurdity of human expectations and demands of unconditional love, dependency, and vulnerability. These creatures have gestures and expressions that appeal to the viewer affectively. But what costs do their twisted limbs, exposed flesh, and proffered insides allude to? What are the consequences of living in a culture where love for other species is corrupted by infantilization and a refusal to offer difference? Again, the photographs cause the viewer to adopt a distanced, rational perspective, while the sculptures demand an empathetic one. But in both modes of working, there are twists which question the normalization of these perspectives. Perspectives which see the value of other animals as dependent on their availability to us. So these two bodies of work, by contrasting each other's focalization, the photographs and the sculptures point to the efficacy and failings of rational and sympathetic approaches. These variable modes of reading, at times scientific, at times emotive, are used for rhetorical purposes to gesture to a political horizon where other means of relatedness may be negotiated. That's my thesis. That's why it sounds really official and art-speaky, so I apologize for that. But okay, so that said, I just want to give another disclaimer. Up until now, I have discussed the function of these works as opposed to interpreting what they mean for you. And I did that intentionally because I fear capping what happens in the face of the work with my words. And so I have to admit I see the contradiction in the following statement. I acknowledge that explaining the complexity of what happens in the work will ultimately be insufficient, but I feel the need to illuminate some of the concepts from which it comes. As I see it, explaining the intentions of this work would be akin to dictionary-like translations of the gestures of dogs. I feel that books which offer such simplifications refute and reduce the individual and subjective relating that happens through embodied communication. Such translations are symptoms of our attempts to literalize a dialectic that is intuitive, to again centralize human language and filter all experience through it. I produce visual art because it, like animal communication, is a vessel for provisional, affective relating. I feel there is a parallel to be found between the ineffable communication of animals and what is beyond language when we encounter art with resonance. In the written thesis which accompanies the work that you've been seeing, I similarly argue the dangers of considering being with animals and being animal solely through human language. And yet I use words to argue for attentiveness to animal being, because it's worth trying anyways, and it's one of the few means we have to engage in conversation about these important things. Continuing this discourse is imperative because the conversation has an ethical purchase on what happens in the lived realm. But I keep coming back to the question, what if there is a better way? To envision alternate modes of being and relating, we have to acknowledge that our language isn't getting there, that it is not enough. Seeking to offer a being animal and a being with animals through the written word, especially when so much of my thinking values decentering anthropocentrism, is a real conundrum for me. I assuage my feelings of hypocrisy by viewing my visual works as functioning symbiotically with the written text. To reiterate, I believe that art, because it parallels non-literal communicative possibilities of animal language, offers a way around our constant demands to understand animality through the language-based mind. Through art, we create a space where what we cannot put words to is valued. I endeavor through sculpture, photo, and my text to offer entry points to other modes of relatedness. My practice does not come solely or even mostly out of philosophical musings on animality. The figures that populate my oeuvre are born out of living body to body, heart to heart, with my non-human companions, past and present. Our fleshy and vulnerable undersides exposed to one another, eyes asking, "Can you feel me?" I see a material, plasticine, clay, wax, and they combine in my mind with my thoughts and fears, the books I've read, and Scooter, who you see here, his gestures and looks that tug on my insides. If you think back to the deer hound figures, they are based on his gestures and communicative relationship with me. The process of my making is intuitive, but in no way mindless, and the effective power of the creatures I produce remains beyond the grasp of my words, the means of my rational language. I was recently reading Donna Haraway's Companion Species Manifesto, and her words had the most uncanny resonance with this work. She wrote that she didn't look to her multi-species family for child surrogates, but she did have a feeling that if she turned up pregnant, she wanted the being in her womb to be a member of another species, and wondered if it turns out to be a general condition, that it's not just mutts who seek a category of one's own significant otherness. The deer hounds and fetuses that I generate, oops, let's look at one of those. Yeah, this is both a deer hound and a fetus. Dwell in those spaces of betweenness or indeterminacy, out of which such distinctions between animal and human as between life and death are produced. We want to pull them into us to comfort, but are uncertain of their raw flesh. They are both art objects and effective interlocutors, speaking to us with their gaze. Perhaps the most important research which informs this body of work are my attentive relationships with other animals. The deer hound figures document, in a fantastical way, the communicative gestures that pass between myself and my non-human family members. And my written thesis is peppered with vignettes which act as documents of a life lived in relation to individual animals. They also disrupt the very austere academic writing that I do, that I have to do. So this is one example of these vignettes. Have you ever been racked by deep body aching sobs and had a cat who never gave a damn about anyone come and sit on your chest, her throaty, resonating purrs massaging the hurt? And here, one more, I'll have to read it off the screen. I remember the day Mallory died, her massive black body being hoisted onto the flatbed of a truck. A chain of enormous links wrapped around her front hooves. Her bowels emptying as her gut was pulled over the harsh edge. Those knobby legs dangling. They always looked like a teenager's, jutting and impossibly long. Moments before she went down, I saw the first boy I'd ever loved, lifting the saddle onto her back, then tightening the girth. That's when she reared up, violently and without warning. I remember the whites of her eyes, but then again, was I close enough? Or am I remembering her body afterward? I remember her going over, hard. I remember her legs stranded in the air, and then the spasms. It seemed like forever, but of course it was just seconds. I remember the scream that strangled in my throat. I remember trying to throw my horse's reins to someone, to run to him, to her, but there were arms stopping me. There was blood coming from her ears. She was gone. Brain aneurysm, they would say. He was, we were, never the same. So while I acknowledge the integral presence of living animals in these works, I am compelled to continue to work representationally. I've made this decision because using individual animals even relationally, is an extension of the instrumentalizing that I'm opposing. Putting an animal in an art context to fulfill my ends, even if my goals are altruistic, is still an acting out of the anthropocentric mindset. In these works, I focus the viewer through well-intentioned, yet ultimately selfish perspectives, in order to emphasize the perversity of naturalizing such a vantage point on the living world. Because I am using creatures of my own creation, I can do so from outside the system of exploitation. I'm not colonizing an individual, his or her body or existence. Just let this video run while I talk. It's a view inside my studio. Sculpture offers an embodied relationship without the harm of utilizing actual animals for artistic needs. The decision to work sculpturally and photographically is an attempt to avoid centering a human subject and objectifying the image of the animal by producing representations that are awkward, problematic, and provisional. And go again to Donna Haraway. She wrote that fiction is liable for showing something we do not yet know to be true, but will know. Living with animals, inhabiting our stories, trying to tell the truth about our relationship, cohabiting an active history. That is the work of companion species, and that is the work I am attempting to do. Thanks. So, if there are any questions. No? Anything about process or?
I just want you to keep talking.
There were images of a book, and I didn't really explain what that is. It's an encyclopedia from 1942, so big and beautiful, but illustrates so many of the problems of language. And so like those redacted text or cut out text and obscured things with images is my way to kind of point to the failing of language, but also that language and understanding is a living thing. And so this document is a living thing that is constantly being changed by me to reflect my feelings. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I have a question, but it's not formulated at all. I'm just wondering if you could speak to maybe feminist politics in your work.
It's something I'm coming to terms with because I have this fear, especially when I started working with animals, of being dismissed as doing something that is only of interest to emotional beings. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to be ghettoized in that way. But as I do my research, I've come on readers on feminist care ethics, and it's really spoken to what I do. So I've kind of incorporated that, but also I am still questioning it. Because there are some problems with empathy as well. I don't think that any viewpoint has it figured out yet. So that's why I spoke about like the political horizon of other relatedness. I can't envision it, but I know it's out there, and so that's what I'm working towards. And obviously, this type of imagery, fetuses, the body, this object kind of figure, it depends very much on feminist artists that have come before. So I know that I exist within that realm, but how I can define myself within the feminist discourse, I haven't really sorted out yet. Okay. That's it? All right, thanks.
A snap of the vignette about the cat.
Oh, yeah.
Is that okay?
This guy? Or the writing?
Mhm.
Okay.
Maybe both then, but you should.
What kind of responses have you gotten from people who use your work in person?
It's interesting that there is a gender divide, it seems, in the response to the work. A lot of men feel much more comfortable dealing with the distance and rational relationship to the photographs, whereas women tend to be more drawn to the sculptures and the embodied like relationship that they have with them. I think people are coming around. It's not a very popular topic to be dealing with. It's still, I think Sue said it yesterday, so easily dismissed because you're dealing with animal issues and that is kind of flaky. And so I hope and I feel like with the rigorousness of my reading and my research that I'm hopefully turning people around on the thought that this work cannot be rigorous because it deals with something of so little importance to them, right? A lot of people want me to speak about the work in a way that says like, oh yeah, it could be about human psychology, or it could be about, and I'm sure someone could analyze me in this work very easily, so you could go there, but that's not where my intentions or my interests spring from. So I do try to keep it on, not that I'm telling you what to think about the work, but I do want to frame the discussion that goes around the work. And in the 2 years that I've been in the program at U of M, people have come around. And so I'm very optimistic. Yeah. Okay.